Violence in Ukraine. How the Vatican is continuing its efforts to end the military conflict. Building back. Congress inches towards federal budget approval, which includes pro-life wins. Male and female. How 2 U.S. states are taking a stand to protect young people. And Doctors of the Church. Wisdom for today from saintly spiritual women. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 9th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Francis of Rome. I'm Tracy Sable. The Vatican is increasing its diplomatic efforts to bring peace to Ukraine. Today, an envoy sent by the Holy Father arrived in the country and received a welcome from church leaders.
Сьогодні до України, до Львова, прибуває особливий післанець Папи Франциска.
Polish Cardinal Konrad Krajewski is one of 2 cardinals visiting the war-torn country as representatives of the Holy See. The Holy Father also has spoken by phone with church leaders in Ukraine. Today, Cardinal Pietro Parolin spoke by phone with Russia's foreign minister. Meantime, Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses Ukrainian Nationalist Forces of hampering the evacuation of citizens from war-torn areas. Russia's leader says its forces have tried to establish humanitarian corridors and were thwarted by Ukrainian-based militants. Ukrainian officials accuse the Kremlin of bombing the areas during evacuations. Meantime, authorities say a Russian missile struck a maternity hospital in the southeastern part of Ukraine. It happened in the city of Mariupol. Philip Crowther, Associated Press International Affiliate reporter, joins us now from Ukraine. Philip, good to see you. As we just mentioned, the bombing in Mariupol today, I'm wondering what more you can tell us about that.
Well, incredibly at this point, and I'm afraid that this might change. We have no details of any deaths resulting from this attack on the maternity hospital in Mariupol. We know that there have been some casualties, injuries, inevitably, but we'll have to wait and see, of course, how this evolves. It would appear that maybe a lot of those who were in the hospital might have been already in the basement to protect themselves from a possible Russian attack. That we don't know yet at this point. But those distressing images of a destroyed maternity hospital made their way around Ukraine and around the world very, very quickly and reached Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also very quickly. And he put out a social media post including that video, and it was a very heartfelt message from him, but also an angry one, asking countries to do more to protect Ukraine. And it has been a demand from him for a pretty long time. He wants a no-fly zone over Ukraine for those types of aerial bombardments to no longer be possible. The country of Ukraine want this, the people of Ukraine rather want this too, but this is an idea that has already been roundly rejected by NATO. Ukraine feels like it's getting a lot of help from NATO countries with weapons being delivered here, but it's not getting all the help it wants during these treacherous times.
Yeah, those images, as you mentioned, are very hard to look at from the hospital. Philip, I'm curious, though. I thought there were supposed to be various ceasefires in Ukraine today.
Yeah, there should be. They don't all last, and they're not all respected largely by the Russian forces. There have been so many attempts to have ceasefires, and those would then facilitate safe passage for people out of these besieged cities. And Mariupol, where you just saw those pictures of that bombed maternity hospital, is one of those cities where there are around 200,000 people believed to desperately need to get out, who want to get out, or who need humanitarian aid to get in. All of that is only possible with a ceasefire and a safe passage corridor, essentially out of the city. And in Mariupol, that absolutely did not happen today. You saw this from the Russian bombing just today, that Russia certainly is not holding to its part of the bargain. But in other parts of this country, ceasefires and humanitarian corridors did happen. The city of Sumy in the northeast for a second day now has seen thousands of people being evacuated. Some people also made it out of the suburbs to the north and northwest of the capital city, Kiev. These are people who evacuated to the capital, which is safer right now, and from where they most likely will be moving on or have already moved on to these areas to the west of the country, which are safer right now.
And Philip, I understand you are in Lviv right now, a city that many refugees pass through. Can you talk to us more about that? And also, what's it like on the ground there currently?
Well, look, it's a really strange feeling when you walk around this city. It feels a little bit normal, maybe for a few minutes, but then the signs of a country at war are pretty much everywhere. There are soldiers in the street, and there are also members of the Territorial Defense Force. These are civilians who only recently got military training, who have decided to join the fight, essentially. What you also see here in the center of the city is the statues in the old center of town have been protected. The windows of the church have been protected as well in case of bombings. So there is a little bit of nervousness here that this city could be bombed at some point as well by Russia. Those refugees are still moving through here, and that won't abate anytime soon, because the good news, of course, with these safe passages being made available to refugees means that they will be streaming this way, and a lot of them, of course, trying to get out of a country at war and toward the neighboring countries, Poland, of course, being the one that has taken up over 1 million people fleeing Ukraine already, out of those over 2 million refugees altogether already.
Well, Philip, as always, thank you so much, and we hope that you stay safe.
Thank you.
Vice President Kamala Harris flew to Poland today to meet with NATO allies and Ukrainian refugees. Meanwhile, back at home, President Joe Biden turned his attention to U.S. manufacturing and supply chains. But the question is, what is being done to ease the current economic pain? White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, tonight the Biden administration is under immense pressure to bring down inflation, now at a 40-year high. And the consumer price report being released tomorrow is expected to show more setbacks.
Americans feeling the pain of inflation, paychecks not going as far as they used to, no quick end in sight. And today at the White House, meeting with business executives as well as governors from both parties, President Joe Biden and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo pushed for passage of the Bipartisan Innovation Act.
So we can invent and make the technologies of the future, and industries like biotechnology, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and others we can barely imagine today.
At the same time, Vice President Kamala Harris begins her journey to Warsaw to thank Poland for taking in hundreds of thousands of people fleeing Ukraine and to make sure the war doesn't spill over into NATO territory. Kyiv's mayor says Ukrainians will not surrender.
We never go to the knee. We are ready to defend our city. We're fighting for our houses. We're fighting for our city. We're fighting for our country.
And as the U.S. tries to cut off Russia's war funding, President Joe Biden signs a new executive order on cryptocurrency. He wants the Federal Reserve to consider starting its own digital currency and providing government oversight. Russia is accused of using cryptocurrency to avoid sanctions.
We're united in our efforts to raise the costs on the Kremlin for waging this ongoing war of choice, which has already displaced more than 2 million Ukrainians.
We're also tracking a developing story in Venezuela. The country finally released 2 imprisoned Americans. This comes after the U.S. sent envoys to Venezuela this past weekend, the first White House delegation in more than 2 decades. President Biden released a statement saying these men are fathers who lost precious time with their children and everyone they love, and their families have suffered every day of their absence. Now they're back in the U.S.
Now, tomorrow, President Biden hosts the president of Colombia at the White House, and the White House says they'll be discussing the COVID-19 response and future pandemic preparedness, economic recovery, and regional responses to migration. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
On Capitol Hill, the U.S. government doesn't have to worry about a shutdown anymore. The House passed a bill keeping offices open until the fall. The Senate is likely to follow shortly. It also has a major win for pro-lifers. The $1.5 trillion package funds the government until September 30th. It includes all pro-life and conscious protections, $782 billion for defense, $720 billion for domestic programs, and $13 billion in Ukraine aid. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the bill meets America's challenges.
The omnibus comes at a crucial moment. With the war in Europe and the return to normal after the pandemic, we have to confront challenges that we haven't seen in a very long time.
Pro-life protections include the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the use of U.S. tax dollars for abortions, are also in the bill. Senator Bill Cassidy tells EWTN News Nightly it's an annual battle.
Democrats have been fighting to get rid of it, every budget bill, for decades. And Republicans always defend it. We defended it successfully again this time. The Hyde protections are in there. Taxpayer dollars will not be used to fund abortion.
The money for Ukraine is earmarked for military and humanitarian aid. Senate Minority Whip John Thune tells EWTN News Nightly it has Republican support.
There's going to have to be some sort of a solution in place, and my expectation is that the annual funding bill and this Ukraine assistance package will probably ride together.
It may take the Senate until this weekend to pass the spending bill. Meanwhile, Congress will soon be on board with the president's decision to ban oil and gas imports from Russia. Coming up, how 2 U.S. states are addressing issues of gender. Plus, 2 Middle East powers meet for the first time in years. We'll explain. The Parental Rights in Education bill passed Florida's Senate this week and is now awaiting Governor Ron DeSantis' signature. The bill, which critics call the Don't Say Gay bill, prohibits teaching about sexual orientation and gender identity to young children in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And joining us now to talk more about this is Jay Richards, Senior Research Fellow for the Heritage Foundation's DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. Jay, welcome back. Always so good to see you. You and I have talked about this bill before, but today the White House reacted to it with Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying, quote, it's discriminatory, it is a form of bullying, it is horrific. Jay, first off, your thoughts on that?
Well, the bill is exactly what it's called. It's the Parental Rights in Education. If you read the bill, it's almost entirely about transparency. In other words, parents should just be in on what they're being taught in schools. That's literally what the bill is about. There's also a provision basically preventing sexualization of kids from K through 3. It doesn't have the word gay in it anywhere. It doesn't prohibit the use of that word. It does say kids shouldn't be introduced by teachers to sexual orientation and gender identity issues, which unfortunately is what's happening right now. And it's very often happening behind parents' backs. There are lawsuits in play in Florida over this. And so this bill is a great first step in the right direction. I'm optimistic that Governor DeSantis will sign it. The fact that not just critics, but the media from AP to CNN won't even call this bill by its actual name, I think tells you what's actually going on.
Yeah, and Jay, why do you think this is getting so much attention and why it's getting sort of, twisted around?
Well, honestly, I mean, the way I would describe this is that we have a particular ideology. We'll call it gender ideology. Just this idea that biological sex is not real, that there are no males and females, there are no boys and girls. What there is there's this subjective gender identity that everyone chooses. This sounds crazy, frankly, to most ordinary people, but this is very deeply rooted in our educational institutions. It's been happening, unfortunately, in public schools with teacher guides and teacher training for years. And parents have just suddenly gotten wise to it. And so Florida is the first one, honestly, to step up. And the people that have been behind this for years, they're very upset because I think they understand that the vast majority of Americans, left, right, and center, if they know their kids are being taught this stuff, aren't going to want it. And so, frankly, a transparency bill that requires transparency is very likely to kill a lot of it. Yeah,
and Jay, what do you think parents should do when it comes to all this?
Well, what parents should absolutely do, first of all, find out exactly what's happening in their schools. So many parents think, okay, this stuff's happening in some other state or some other district. Find out what's actually being taught in your school. Once this bill passes, I mean, in principle, parents have rights over their children. This is generally a constitutional right, but so it should be unnecessary to pass laws like this. But the reality is there's a lot of stonewalling, and so parents need to find out exactly what's being taught on these subjects in their schools and don't take no for an answer.
Yeah, I want to switch gears here a bit. I want to talk about Texas. Texas Children's Hospital, which is the largest pediatric hospital in the country, is now halting what it calls gender-affirming treatments. This is to be in order to be in compliance, with a directive from Governor Greg Abbott that in part classifies treatments such as puberty blockers as child abuse. I know it also carries penalties for those that violate the directive. What more can you tell us about this, and also how significant is it?
It's very significant what's happening in Texas. This was originally a 7-page judgment by Attorney General Ken Paxton, who just basically said, okay, let's look at the data, what the laws on the books in Texas say about child abuse. They determined that the types of procedures, so-called gender-affirming care, which very often means giving testosterone shots to girls for years, even surgical alterations, insofar as they involve sterilization of minors, constitutes child abuse. The media are describing this as Texas going after parents. That's really not what's happening. Texas doesn't distinguish in law between the parents or the physicians or anything like that. They just say what constitutes child abuse. But this ruling that the governor himself has affirmed is really a protection for parents. So when parents are being told by Child Protective Services, by their school's teachers, by their physicians, that they need to get, say, their girls on testosterone treatments or their boys on puberty-blocking drugs, parents in Texas can now say, no, that the state itself treats this as child abuse. And so what I would expect to happen is the state's not going to be going after parents. It's going to be going after, frankly, the institutional pathways that are pushing this on kids. And I'm glad that Texas is stepping up and trying to do something about it.
Yeah, and as you know, Texas is getting a lot of pushback as well. But that said, do you think other states may follow in Texas's footsteps?
I do. I would expect to see both what's happening in Florida and what's happening in Texas to continue. Those are the two states that are going to test this. They're going to get a lot of pushback. There'll be corrections on the details, I think. They'll figure out exactly how to frame it. But we need parents' rights. We need school choice. We need transparency. And we also need to focus on this standard of care, because the reality is there are procedures happening right now in which people are having their kids taken away and kids are being given sterilizing drugs. And it's happening not just with impunity, it's often happening with the authorities' tacit support, and that's absolutely got to stop.
Jay, thanks so much. Always appreciate your expertise. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
A bishop in Puerto Rico calls his removal totally unjust. Bishop Daniel Fernandez Torres says the Holy Father had deemed him disobedient. Our sister agency, Aussie Prensa, reports that the bishop had clashed with other bishops in Puerto Rico. Two Middle East powers mark a diplomatic breakthrough as Isaac Herzog becomes the first Israeli leader to visit Turkey in 14 years. Despite a small group of protesters in Istanbul, President Herzog participated in a wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb of modern Turkey's founder. Both presidents later appeared at a joint press conference vowing to rebuild relations despite years of strained ties. Austria is ending its coronavirus vaccination mandate for most adults. The law was passed last month in reaction to surges from COVID-19 variants. Today, the government decided to temporarily suspend the vaccine mandate, citing a decline in rates of infection. Enforcement was scheduled to begin next week. A conservative former prosecutor has declared victory in South Korea's presidential election today. The winning People Power Party members are wearing red as they cheered the vote count. The conceding Democratic Party partisans are in blue. Yoon Suk-yeol will assume office early in May. Up next, a conference in Rome examines the inspiration offered by the female doctors of the church. In the nation's capital, two Catholic families are suing the D.C. mayor over the city's school mask mandate. They allege unfairness and an undue burden as the Archdiocese of Washington has lifted its requirement. Catholic schools in neighboring Baltimore and Arlington are mask optional. A meeting this week in Rome discussed the role of the female doctors of the Church. Women Doctors of the Church and Patronesses of Europe was a two-day conference earlier this week in Rome. It included a message from the Holy Father. There are 4 female doctors of the Church. 3 female saints are co-patrons of Europe. Joining us now from Rome is Julia Lombardi, professor of history of ancient philosophy at the Pontifical Urban University. Professor Lombardi, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Can you tell us more about this meeting and the topics that you discussed?
The meeting has this particular relevance because it was an international and inter-universities meeting conference in 2 days conference, and the topic was how women doctors of the Church and patron saints of Europe can be in dialogue with today's world. And this was important because, first of all, there was this particular characteristic of relation among the universities involved in this particular Congress, and also for the charity, because we should remember that the purpose of the donations for this conference was for the project of literacy and training in particular institutions in Lebanon for youth and particular for girls. It was interesting, first of all, to have this dialogue with female saints and the reality of today.
Wonderful. I understand Pope Francis sent a video message for the conference. Can you tell us a little bit about his remarks?
It was impressive for us, and in particular for the rector of the University of Avila, because at the conclusion, at the ending of the conference yesterday, had this message, and so it was read to the audience. The remarks are important for us and for the world because it was the Pope in listening to these doctors of the Church, and he remarked this fact, the eminence, the preeminence of the doctrine of these little women who loved so much the Church.
And before I let you go, can you tell us how the female doctors of the Church, how they remain relevant today?
They are relevant today in any case because they are doctors of the Church. And as Pope Francis emphasizes, this means that their doctrine has a relevance which covers every time and every place. In particular, during this conference, we realized that each of these doctors of the Church as something to teach to you, to us, and to you as for each one, because of this centrality of Christ in their lives.
Oh, Professor Lombardi, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Julia Lombardi, Professor of History of Ancient Philosophy at the Pontifical Urban University. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.